But a big shout out to Snowbird and to Dave Fields and Hillary Arns. Thank you so much. 3 years of coming together and talking about Utah's Great Salt Lake is very meaningful on so many levels. It's a great educational opportunity. We want all of you to walk away and to keep on advocating for the lake. It is a pleasure to be working with the Nature Conservancy, and we have lots of Nature Conservancy folks here today. For those who came here because you were invited, because you're a part of our newsletter, thank you. And we would love to offer you a pair of Smart Wool socks. So please go get your awesome Smart Wool socks. Smart Wool is one of our partners. I'm wearing Smart Wools right now, and they are just toasty, so you want a pair of those. But if you happened to come here today, and this is your first time being introduced to the Nature Conservancy, please go and sign up. There's a great little QR code. Show one of our volunteers that you have decided to become part of our, be part of our family, and that is just by, receiving our newsletter. There's no solicitation. You also can get a pair of Smart Wool socks. So we want everyone to have, roasty toes for today. Also, we have put together this beautiful coloring book for kids and adults. And this actually is a highlight of the birds and the beautiful landscape of our Great Salt Lake Shorelands Preserve, which is a public preserve owned by the Nature Conservancy, and it is open every day. So if you get a chance, it's up in Layton. Please go visit it. It's a great connection to our beautiful lake. With that being said, I would like to turn it over to Elizabeth Kitchens, who is the Nature Conservancy's new Utah State Director, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the organization and then introduce our special guest. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Snowbird again for hosting us, and I hope that most of you had a taste of the great snow. Well, not a taste, that would be a bad thing. So that you got some great skiing in this morning. So as Sarah said, I'm going to do just a really short intro. We'll tell you a little bit more about the Nature Conservancy and then turn it over to our guest speaker today, Tim Davis. So as you all know, the snow that you were just out in is really the source of water and source of life for the state of Utah. Without that, we wouldn't be able to live here. We wouldn't have the Great Salt Lake. The Great Salt Lake, they have this mutually beneficial relationship, the lake and the mountains. So the Nature Conservancy has been working in Utah for around 40 years. One of our first projects was out at the Great Salt Lake, and sadly, we were in the news, the Great Salt Lake, a couple of years ago, not for the snow here in Utah, but because of the dire condition of the Great Salt Lake, which Tim is going to share a little bit more about what we're doing about that. But the Nature Conservancy got our start 40 years ago. We bought a parcel out near this, on the eastern shore of the Great Salt Lake. I will just pause for a moment and tell you, I've been on the job for 2 months, and I'm a little bit nervous this morning. So there we go, getting a little tongue twisted here. Thank you. So several transactions later, we now have the Great Salt Lake Shorelands Preserve, which Sarah mentioned, and it's over 4,000 acres along the eastern shore, and it's primarily for the protection of the wetland system that is the Great Salt Lake feeds into. Over 10 million birds a year rely on the wetlands of the Great Salt Lake. Cutting in and out a little bit, but I'll just hold it closer maybe. And I would urge you to take the short drive up to our preserve. It's just by Layton. And this time particular of year, in the springtime, is when you'll get to see a lot of birds. I was out there on Sunday and got to hear some sandhill cranes. I couldn't quite pick them out through my binoculars, but saw lots of red-winged blackbirds. There were flock of pelicans overhead, and so many raptors that we lost count. So I urge you to go up and take the walk around the boardwalk and walk up the tower so you can really get a bird's eye view of some of the wetlands that are around the Great Salt Lake. So as I told you, a couple of years ago, the Great Salt Lake was at its lowest level in history and was really on the brink of environmental collapse. So that crisis generated opportunity and action, as crises often do. And we're going to hear a little bit about some of the action that has been taken. And I want to tell you a little bit more about the Nature Conservancy, which is that we are a global organization. We work in all 50 states and 70 countries around the world. And we have over 4,000 employees, many of whom, over 600 scientists, biologists, ecologists, and we have a network of over 1 million members. We've protected 119 million acres across the globe. That's about the size of Spain. We do this working closely with other organizations, so collaboration is something that the Nature Conservancy is very focused on and proud of. A lot of our work is focused on what we call whole systems. One of those whole systems that we're familiar with here in Utah is the Colorado River and the Colorado River Basin. So we have a 6-state program that focuses on the Colorado River, and the health of that is also in great jeopardy, as you all know. We also work on our terrestrial whole systems, the forests and the sagebrush landscape that is in the west. So I want to make sure that I've got my notes here and I haven't missed anything that Jim and Sarah told me that I needed to talk about. Okay, what I want to share with you is that we, the Nature Conservancy, here in the Salt Lake Valley, we've been instrumental in some of the actions that were taken in response to the dire condition of the Great Salt Lake. And we work closely with the Commission, as well as other state agencies and other NGOs like the National Audubon Society, in really focusing on the health of the lake. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today to talk about the role of the Great Salt Lake Commission. So this is Tim Davis on my left, and as I walked in, I kind of feel like I'm up here on Johnny Carson, and there should be like a band over there, and he's going to walk in behind the curtain, but we'll ignore all of that and just go with, Tim has led water agencies in 2 states. So most recently, he served as the director of the Utah Division of Drinking Water. Prior to coming to Utah, Tim oversaw the water rights, water resources, drinking water, and water quality programs for over 10 years in the state of Montana. Tim also served as the chair of the Western States Resource Council. He grew up in Lander, Wyoming. Spent some time there myself. It's a beautiful little town. Spends most of his free time outdoors with his family and their 2 dogs. So welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I am the Deputy Commissioner of the Great Salt Lake. The Commissioner, Brian Steed, was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, he's sick. So he would give you a very colorful PowerPoint presentation. I am not a PowerPoint person, so I'm here to just talk with you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I have been in the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's office has only been in existence since last year. I've been in existence for longer than that, but the Commissioner's office has only been around since July 1st of 2023. And it was created in reaction to where the lake got to in 2022. The lake fell to its lowest recorded level, and I'm going to be throwing out some elevation levels. I should have like GIFs, or if anybody can remember these different elevation levels for the lake. I give out awards, but I'll do that next time. So the lake fell to an elevation of 4,188 and a half feet above sea level, and that is the lowest recorded level for the lake. And at that time, that was having the ecosystem on the lake, and people who think about the lake as a saline lake, the south arm of the lake does have a thriving ecosystem, even though it's saltier than the ocean. It has brine shrimp, brine flies, nematodes. Apparently, just found that out. I read an article on that today. And in 2022, the brine flies were starting to disappear. The brine shrimp were showing significant signs of stress as well. And as Elizabeth said, there are 10 to 12 million birds that rely upon the lake and rely upon that ecosystem. as part of their flyway. And so the state came together through the legislature, the governor's office, groups like the Nature Conservancy, the Audubon Society, all of you who care about the lake realized how close we were to disaster if we didn't act. And in the 2003, and really over the last 3 years, the legislature in the state of Utah we've radically changed our water laws. We've made significant, almost $500 million of investment in conservation. And I'll talk a little bit about that because not all of that goes to the lake, but it sets the stage for us to conserve more water and get it to the lake. And then they created the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office. One thing the state did over that time was also create what's called, and it's before the creation of the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office, they created the Great Salt Lake Enhancement Trust, and then the Nature Conservancy, working with the Audubon Society, leads that trust, and a diverse group of stakeholders from across the Great Salt Lake Basin to make an investment of over $40 million in protecting wetlands and getting more water to the lake. And I just want to thank the Nature Conservancy for the work they've done. The Commissioner's Office, I've already started attending all those meetings and we'll be working closely with the Nature Conservancy and Audubon on that. But you guys should be proud, any of you that are members of the Nature Conservancy, of the work that the Nature Conservancy has done on the lake so far. I'm going to tell you $40 million is not going to be enough. And so the legislature just appropriated, I guess is the legal term, the Commissioner's Office another $10 million, but that's not going to be enough either. It is going to take a long time for us to get the lake back to a healthy level. And I want to start really talking about how we got to where we are today, how we got to the lake at its lowest level. And I think too often in the conversations about how we got here, there's too much, people point fingers about who's using the water, what has happened. The state of Utah, like all of the West, grew up around something called the prior appropriation doctrine. The pioneers came to Utah, they started putting water to use, and the first people to put water to use had the right to use that water even in times of drought. And it wasn't until recently that, in just the last few years, that you could actually legally put water to use for environmental purposes. That you could only protect water prior to the last few years, you could only protect water for agricultural uses, industrial uses, municipal uses, other beneficial uses. Water in the past was seen as wasted if it got to the Great Salt Lake. And that's not unique to Utah. When I was in Montana and oversaw the water programs there, people would talk about water going out, leaving the state on the Missouri River as wasted, even though it flowed down the Missouri River to ultimately to the Mississippi and to the Gulf of Mexico. So we got here with a system that was designed to ensure that our communities, that our farms, that our businesses had enough water, and we didn't realize at the time the impact that it was having on the lake. You add into that 20 years of drought and climate change, and you exacerbate that appropriation of water over time, and we get to the place where the lake was falling down through where we're beginning to see ecological disaster. So, so luckily, we've realized what happened. We've made changes, and fairly radical changes. Water law, and I've overseen all the water laws in a state before, is really complicated. There's a reason I don't do it anymore, because it's really complicated, it's really hard to change, but Utah was able to make dramatic light speed changes to water law to ensure that water can now get to the lake. And so if you have a legislator who you know, you should thank them for the changes they've made, because they've set the stage for us now to be able to conserve water, get it to the lake. And they also created the Great Salt Lake Commissioner's Office, and they directed us by the end of 2023 to develop a strategic plan for the Great Salt Lake. I started in November 11th, and we had not put a pen to paper on the Great Salt Lake strategic plan, and so you can imagine, my boss likes to talk about, Thanksgiving was basically writing the strategic plan, Christmas was writing the strategic, but we were able, there's a lot of work, including from conservation organizations, from agencies, federal, state, universities, that had already been done that we could pull from. And so we developed a strategic plan. It was approved by the governor by the end of last year. It became public on January 15th. And that plan, for the very first time, established a healthy level for the lake. It's the target level that we're all shooting for to get the lake to. And again, here's another elevation number I'm going to give you. The lake is currently, as of today, at approximately 4,194 feet above sea level. We need to get it to, for the healthy range, 4,198 to 4,205 feet. So we still have 4 feet of elevation gain to get to the lake, just to get it to a healthy range and sustain it there. That's what we're shooting for. We now have a target that the state has adopted through a strategic plan to get there. We also established a floor, and we said we never want to get back to where we were in 2022. So we established a floor of 1.5 feet above where we got in 2022 and started seeing what was going to be ecological disasters, so 4,190 feet above sea level. And we were directed to coordinate all state agencies, coordinate with stakeholders, conservation groups, federal agencies, to make sure that we are doing everything we can in a coordinated fashion to get the lake to a healthy range and sustain it. We also, and that's a lot of, it's a tremendous amount of water that's going to be needed every year over the next 30 years to get us to that level and sustain it. We're talking, the Nature Conservancy in Audubon through the Trust just came out with a 5-year plan. They've targeted getting 100,000 acre feet more of conservation to the lake. We're going to need more like 500,000 acre feet of water to the lake, additional conservation every year for 30 years. To put that in context, that is a 26%, that's 26% of all the water depleted by all the water uses in the Great Salt Lake Basin each year. So it's a huge amount. We're going to be developing a detailed plan over the next year about how do we get there, how much we're already conserving with the Trust and others, how much of that conservation, and there are a lot of things that you probably do. I mean, I tore out all my grass, and I put down 6 cubic yards of chat to xeriscape our yard. My wife told me exactly what to do, but I did all that labor, in working with farmers, working with businesses, working with municipalities, we need to figure out how much we're already conserving, how much of that is getting to the lake, because we don't know right now, honestly. And then we need to figure out that delta, how much more we need, and then work with everybody in the Great Salt Lake Basin to conserve water, dedicate it to the lake, and get it there. And I think one of the most important messages I've learned putting together the strategic plan, having over 25 years of experience in working with water agencies, working with conservation agencies, and running state agencies is, and listening to people across Utah and the Great Salt Lake Basin, it's going to take everyone. It's going to take agriculture uses about 2/3 of the amount of water in the Great Salt Lake Basin, but they're not doing anything that is wrong. They just happen to, by history about how we developed within the basin, they just use most of the water. So we need to work with municipal water users, we need to work with industrial water users, and we need to work with irrigators in order to figure out how much water we can conserve in each of those different sectors, and then how do we get that water dedicated to the lake and shepherd it to the lake. So that's the hard work that Nature Conservancy and the Trust have already started. there's a lot more that we need to do. And that's really, I live, breathe, dream about the Great Salt Lake now. So, and that's really what we're dedicated, now that we've got the strategic plan done, to implementing going forward. So it's going to take all of you, it's going to take all of your neighbors, it's going to take pretty much everybody you know in the basin to change how we use and value water. It's going to, the movie that you guys are going to see is great. It talks about many of these things. It talks, Dave is on there talking about how important the snowpack is and how much water we can get to the basin. We're at 130% of average snowpack, give or take today. And we're very lucky that we've had a really great, a record-breaking water year, snowpack year last year. That bought us time. This water year has bought us time. We just reached, the lake just reached the level, the highest level it reached last year. It just reached that, and that's before, that was just this week, and that's before runoff happens. And so I encourage all of you, think about what you can do, think about what your cities can do, think about what your companies can do, think about if you, to conserve water, and then talk to your municipalities, talk to your, if you happen to be a farmer, if you happen to be a business owner who uses water, how you can dedicate those savings and get them to the lake. Those are all the 3 steps we need to take, and and it's going to take a cultural change from all of us dedicating that water to the lake and making sure we're making changes. Because it's not just going to be 1 year. It's not going to be just 2 years of great snow. We need to be able to do this sustainably over 30 years and maintain it over that long term. But these last 2 years have taught us something, and when Mother Nature gives us water, we need to get as much of it to the lake as possible, because during drought years, you're basically, what is it, getting blood from a turnip or a stone. There's much less water that we can, we're just at that point trying to staunch the bleeding. We're trying to minimize the impact on the lake. During the drought years, we would see the lake come up half its normal rise because there just wasn't enough water getting down to it. With conservation, we can minimize that, help ideally get the lake to its normal 2.5 foot rise that it gets every year. It also drops normally 2.5 feet. But during the drought, we were depleting about 400,000 acre-feet more from the lake than was going into the lake every year. So we need conservation in good years, and somewhat paradoxically, we need it more in wet years. And in this year, the reason the lake has already come up about 1.5 feet is because reservoirs were already full, soil moisture was full, and we started diverting water, getting water to the lake during the winter when no one else is really using it. And that's, so we'll be working on what's known as a wet year plan to make sure, with irrigation districts, with cities, with the big water providers in the basin, to make sure that we maximize our wet years, and then we conserve as much as water users and get that to the lake during dry years as well. But so everything you can think about where you can conserve water, wet years, dry years, I'm asking you to please take those steps, do it, and then figure out how to get there. Go for it, Hilly.
So what does that mean both for as a citizen and as someone that helps manage water through the resort? So if I say, okay guys, if we save 100 gallons doing this, how do I know that it can go to the Great Salt Lake? What are the steps a business has to do to help that water get to the lake?
Great, did everybody hear the question? Okay, so the first thing you need to do is, well, first quantify your savings. I mean, if you know you've saved, well, I'll just use, I'm gonna use 100, we'll use your 100 gallons. So actually I'm gonna put it in acre feet because it's easier to understand. So an acre foot is an square acre filled with 1 foot of water. So that's typically, when we're talking, gallons are great, but when we're talking about the amount of water we need, we're really talking in acre feet, because we're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acre feet that we need to get to the lake. So if I save 100 acre feet, and I can show that I'm using 100 acre feet through conservation, then what we need you to do is to work with what's the state engineer and who runs the Division of Water Rights to dedicate that savings and change the use of that savings to in-stream flow for the Great Salt Lake. So that way, those savings, when you leave them in stream, they can be protected all the way to the lake, and once they get to the lake, they can be protected from diversions from the lake. Because there are diversions that come out of the lake, they're primarily for mineral extraction. So we need to A, conserve, B, measure, C, change those water rights and dedicate them to the lake permanently or on a time limited basis, and then make sure that, work with the state engineer to make sure that water is protected all the way to the lake. And we need about, just our initial target of what we're looking at is, we're looking at about 200,000 acre feet of water. That's about 11% of all the water use depleted in the Great Salt Lake Basin. That's our initial target. Like I said, we probably need more like 500,000, 471,000. We're going to be nailing down those numbers and getting specific targets over the next year. But those are the steps. And so we've had a lot of people do that first step. We've had some people do that second step, and they've worked with the trust to do that. But very few people have done, almost nobody's done all of those steps for us to have a measurable, protectable amount of water going to the lake. So, yeah, great question. There was a question back there?
Yeah, I just had a question on the 100,000 or 500,000 acres. Is that a cumulative target, or is that an annualized?
It's an average. So it's an average of every year. So, and this is where the wet years I was just talking about come in. So if we can get 1 million acre feet into the lake of additional conservation this year because of how much we stored up in our reservoirs last year, there's about 1.4 million acre feet stored in our reservoirs last year that are all full. Most of them are 20 to 30% above normal now in the reservoir levels. And we have soil moisture, which we didn't have last year. The 2023, that snow water year, a lot of that water went into the soil, and it went because we were shocked we didn't see flooding last year. But it mostly went into reservoirs, and it did raise the lake 5.5 feet. But we need an average, so it's going to be, we'll have, and that average needs to take into consideration if we fall back into 20 years of drought again, too. So that's that range of we're looking at the 200,000 to 471,000 acre feet. It's going to be an average every year for those 30 years. But that's why we need to maximize wet years when Mother Nature has given us a lot of water, given us a lot of snow. If we can get a big chunk of that into the lake, get the lake into a healthy range, that buys us a buffer for dry years when the lake won't rise as much. Good question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rich, closing the causeway last year saved the lake, but it also created this artificial two-lake system where the northern part of the lake is 4 feet lower than the southern part. And so when we're talking about healthy lake levels, are we just referring now to the southern portion, or are we thinking about the lake as a whole? And
so please, this is Kevin Perry, so you can please think of some hard question to ask him later. Because I won't be here to do it. I have to drive to Kanab as soon as we're done out to give another talk. But, so everybody heard that question? Everyone's aware that the lake is bifurcated. It's more than bifurcated, but for simplicity's sake, the Union Pacific built a causeway for the train all the way across the lake, and it separated the lake into a north arm and a south arm. If you've seen those pictures, then you'll see them in the movie. If you haven't seen them, the north arm is a really pretty red and other interesting colors, and it's much more saline than the south arm. The south arm, Gilbert Bay, that is where it's more ecologically vibrant. That's where the brine shrimp industry. That's where most of actually probably all of the thriving wetlands, but probably not all. I just haven't been on the wetlands. If there are wetlands coming in at deltas and coming in the north arm, but there's a breach in that causeway that last year the state closed that breach to keep as much water into the south arm of the lake because salinity levels were rising. That's really as the lake goes down, the amount of salt goes up and it becomes toxic to the life forms that currently use it. And that's why those same life forms are not in the North Arm, because it's too saline. It's too salty. So the state filled in that breach. The lake came up 5.5 feet. And to put that in context, the lake has the highest measurable rise of the lake is 6 feet. So a lot of water came in. We kept most of it in the lower part of the lake, but we still only rose to 4 feet below the healthy level. And that water then flowed, I think it was probably 4 feet, the north arm was 4 feet lower, so now you've created a waterfall that pushed the rocks and other things that were put in that breach, they pushed it over, and water pushed down that berm that they built in that breach in the causeway. So right now, we have not rebuilt that dam in the causeway. More water is going in, and we as a state, it's official state policy to treat the lake as a whole lake, not just the south arm. And legislation just passed that directed the state to try to keep the difference between the south arm and north arm, if possible, within 2 feet of each other. Hydrology doesn't necessarily work with a ruler, but it's a goal to try to keep it within 2 feet. But yeah, official policy and to treat them both, to not just completely kill the north arm at the expense of the south arm. Luckily, salinity levels are in a good place in the south arm right now, but we've already come up 1.5 feet. I'm guesstimating that we'll come up at least another maybe 2 feet. I'm hoping we'll come up more than that. But yeah, it's a good question. Go for it.
Tim, could you continue going south and help us to understand the relationship between Utah Lake and Great Salt Lake and what possibilities make sense to you?
Sure. Everybody heard that question too, the relationship Utah Lake, Great Salt Lake. So let me back up and say there's 4 main sources of water for the Great Salt Lake. They are the Jordan River, which flows through which is water that primarily flows through Utah Lake. It also comes out of Little Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood, the canyons. There's the Weber River that comes out, the Weber and Ogden rivers system, and then there's the Bear River system. Bear River is the biggest, but we need conservation flows out of all of them. This year, Utah Lake reached what's called a compromise level, and so it is and again, as I started talking about water rights and how we've appropriated water on the system, that will control how much water can be used or diverted, especially during times of dry times. With all the water that we've had, Utah Lake basically filled up to 100% of its safe pool. And about a month and a half ago, Utah Lake opened its gates and started flowing water that had been built up in Utah Lake that's flowing now from the Provo River, Rock Creek, Deer Creek into the Utah Lake. That is now flowing at about 700-800 cubic feet per second down the Jordan River. It's being diverted around parts of the Jordan River, but it's ultimately getting into the Great Salt Lake, either in Farmington Bay or what's known as the Goggin Drain. So it's a significant increase, and this is when we have flows, when we have wet water year, we need to make sure that just this year, because the Commissioner's Office asked all the big water providers that had been storing water early in winter, based on the water conditions, to look for when and how they could move as much water as they could early in the winter and throughout the winter to the Great Salt Lake, and they have. And so that's one of the things that we've seen. And part of that is a regulatory release to protect the Utah Lake and to protect because it's also, Utah Lake's a natural lake, but also a reservoir. So right now, what's known as the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, and the Weaver Basin Water Conservancy Districts are all releasing water to the Great Salt Lake. So that's, the legislature did also fund a new study of Utah Lake, how to make sure it's healthy, and to look at how it can potentially get more water to the Great Salt Lake. So we'll be looking into that too. Go for it.
I was around in the 80s, I guess,
Me
when
too.
we had the big flood. I guess my question is, the problem is that lake is so shallow that, inputs and outputs greatly affect the height of it.
Right.
Have we looked, or have you guys looked at maybe expanding the Willard Bay, Farmington Bay, that whole freshwater catchment to maybe raise that a little bit to offset that ebb and flow of the lake, so you don't end up with a flooding drought situation?
So there have been a couple studies that, and there are a number of berms, like the berm that goes across Farmington Bay to, has everybody been to Antelope Island? Okay, if you haven't, you should go. It's an otherworldly, really interesting place. And I first saw the Great Salt Lake in the 80s. I grew up in Wyoming and then drove down to Salt Lake and saw this big inland sea that was, and does everybody know about the Bangerter pumps that were built then to pump the Great Salt Lake to protect development and to pump water away from the Great Salt Lake? Those are still there, but then if you, 2022, I got up on the top of Antelope Island and looked out, and Farmington Bay was largely dry at that point. And luckily it's not. I drove over there, but there's that yesterday, and there's water on both sides on the road to Antelope Island. We're going to look at all options. The one concern that I've had about a number of plans, because you've got Bear River Bay as well, you've got Farmington Bay, is that more water that fresh water that we impound, if we were to impound it behind and away from Gilbert Bay, which is most of the South Arm, that's where the brine shrimp are, is that we potentially increase the salinity levels in that bay because you're not mixing that fresh water in. So any changes, any structural changes that would be made there would have to be very carefully balanced with the amount of water that you're getting into Gilbert Bay to protect the ecosystem. So yeah, we'll be looking at all options. How many of you heard about a thought, I'll just call it the idea of pumping water from the Pacific Ocean to the Great Salt Lake? Has anybody heard of that? Okay, so the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan has 3 different time frames in it. It's got short term, that's this year. What do we need to do this year? And that largely builds off work like the Trust and others that's already ongoing, and try to enhance that work. Then there's a 5-year plan after that. So how do we iterate? What else do we need to do? One of those things is starting to look at where might we potentially get other sources of water and import it into the basin. I'm going to let you know right now, importing seawater up over the Sierras into the Great Salt Lake is not going to be a viable option. So, and so we will be looking at places closer to home if the hydrology is right. I mean, the Colorado, as Elizabeth said, the Colorado River Basin is suffering. I mean, I think Lake Powell's at 30% of pool right now of its capacity. So those are going to be really long, hard efforts. But we'll be looking at all of the options. But conservation is really the first, cheapest, and best option that we have. The legislature did fund, did pass a bill to create what's called generational water infrastructure planning, and there'll be somebody who's probably my counterpart or the Commissioner Steed's counterpart to look at that, to really, if we're going to be able to import water from other places, and I'm glad I'm not doing that right now, but yeah, conservation, our plan is really focused in the state. We need to stay focused on conservation for the short and medium term, and see how much we can value the water that we use every day and value the lake, and just, it's a cultural change that we need to make, much more than a technical change. And any type of change of impoundments, how water is stored in the lake, or importation of water, those will be much more technical changes, engineering changes that will have to balance the hydrology on the lake itself and the chemistry. Yeah, super expensive. So I wanted to short circuit the Pacific Coast pipeline question, so I didn't. But all right, let's go here and then there. Cool. Yeah.
With respect to Utah Lake, you know, is the plan to leave those gates open through the spring runoff, or is it too early to tell?
Looking at, and this probably won't surprise anybody, but I have, does speed dial even exist anymore? So on speed dial on my phone, as well as my computer, I pull up all the water data across the Great Salt Lake Basin, probably a little too religiously. So the amount, I mean, having the snowpack be at 130% at this point in the season, and given how much storage there is in Jordanelle Reservoir, how much is in Deer Creek Reservoir, which both feed down into Utah Lake, which is still, I haven't looked today, but probably at 100%, even with the gates open. It's very likely it will be, they'll still be passing water through at probably the level they are doing now for months to come. So I can't guarantee any of that. Mother Nature, while she's given, she can also take away. So but yeah, my guess is that, you know, Echo, so in the Weaver system, Echo Reservoir, they've been draining water out of that to make a flood pool, to make room for floodwaters that come in. Pineview, and so I'm guessing with the hydrology we have now, that yes, water will still be passing through, and then runoff will happen, and ideally the lake gets as high as we can this year, and then we keep having good years as we're putting the plan into effect. Go for it in the back.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for being here. One of the questions I have is, you say it takes, you know, everybody and its cultural change. I believe Salt Lake is known as an arid mountain desert. When you go to other places, let's say Phoenix, you don't see any grass other than golf courses. They stick out like a sore thumb. How do we get to a place where we change that culture, or are able to incentivize people or get them to understand when you see more zero-scaping happening, or things like that? How do we go about that, and why are we so much different here than, you know, somewhere else that might also be considered a desert?
Again, I think it's just the way we've developed. Is what we were expecting. I'll go back and I'll use the Colorado River as an example. When the Colorado River treaties were first developed, it was a time of unusually high amount of water, as well as some, let's just say, optimistic forecasts. And we're no different. Until 20 years ago, go back to the 80s, which is longer than 20 years, I'm sad to say. We had a ton of water, and then we just have developed the way that we always thought we were going to. I will say I don't think humans are particularly good at long-term planning, or we haven't shown ourselves to be amazing at it, but we're now dealing with the realities of, we do live in an arid, we live in an arid state. The Great Salt Lake is particularly arid. We've developed to the point where, you know, those three factors I talked about at the beginning, how we developed, 20 years of drought and climate change, that we need to have a different model about how we grow. If we're going to continue to grow, it has to be a different model. There was I know and it's going to take each of us doing, again, what we can do. It's going to take the industry, the development community, as we grow to change what the cheapest, easiest way to put in xeriscaping, to put in water smart, landscape features, conservation is when you first develop. So then you don't have to go back and retrofit and tear it out. Ivory Homes, which is one of our biggest development companies, they've been trying to move in that direction too. But we're just going to need, and our plan calls out, we need a different model of how we're going to grow, and we need to value that water as we grow, and we need to retrofit what we've already got out there. So I am not offering my services to go put in 6 cubic yards of chat for you, but if you can, my wife thought I looked kind of ripped after that, so that was good. So I'll take what I can get. Wait, let's see, there was another question on the end. Okay, yeah, go ahead, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tim and Elizabeth, for your comments, particularly for your optimism in the middle today. So my question is, as I've been flying in and out of Salt Lake for years, can't help but notice the explosive growth, explosive building. Look at 21st South. And I just wonder about all that water that people are using, not only xeriscaping is great, but flushing and washing and consuming. So is there, I'm glad you mentioned that about Ivory Homes, because I always wonder, do these developers have to go through any kind of a process to document or justify or ask how much water they potentially will use?
So Elizabeth mentioned that at my last job, I oversaw drinking water for the state of Utah. We have perverse disincentives for conservation in the state. And one of my jobs previously was to require public water systems, communities to ensure they had enough water, and based on 5 years of data, of their average water use over those 5 years. That's backwards looking, so it doesn't take into consideration conservation measures. There was legislation to change that, and in our strategic plan, we have oversight of the water agencies. We're asking them to sit down and get rid of those perverse disincentives, and we'll be developing a conservation standard for growth. We're going to ask them to start implementing that. When it comes to, I think, and this might be too much information, so if it's too TMI, I apologize. I flushed 3 times. And the reason for that, and it's a joke, but it's still true. Most of your wastewater that goes down, your wastewater system goes into the lake, as long as it's not reused for other purposes. Where we really, it's evaporation and evapotranspiration where water is depleted from the system. So I will tell you, I'm less concerned about inside water use because it's not as consumptive. It's really outside water use, and that's where grass and I know that there was not as the gentleman said in the back, there's other models or 6 cubic yards of, you can tell I'm going to keep harping on this, of chat, that it's really the outside water loss and consumption where we really need to focus and change. Inside is helpful, but a lot of that water, as long as we're not reusing that water and depleting it, and there are some water systems, some wastewater systems that evaporate. They don't clean the water and discharge it into to a river or stream that goes in the Great Salt Lake. So I'm less concerned about the inside, very concerned about the outside, and that's where, as we grow, it's the amount of grass that we're putting in that concerns me the most.
So I know there are other questions. We've only got about 5 minutes left. Do you want to take another question, or do you have some final comments that you want to make?
I'm much happy to answer your questions. I give talks there all day, every day. So
all right.
Then.
We've talked a lot about water conservation from the municipal perspective, but especially with thinking about the development we have here in Utah, thinking about population growth in the future. It's hard to imagine that we're going to use that much less water from the municipal and industrial side. We need to conserve more, but we're going to be conserving more in part in order to supply water for more people. So then I see there's this math problem that then the other 2/3 not about that. But, you know, the Great Salt Lake is kind of a microcosm for some of the structural water problems here across the West. How do you envision working with that agricultural sector on this? Is it a conserve and have, you know, use 25% less water? Is it a buy and dry kind of scenario? How do you envision that going over the medium to long term?
It's a great question too. We're not just focused on the municipal and industrial. And there are good things that just happen on the industrial side. Mineral extraction industries, they're being brought into the system. There are new tools that we were given as a state to incentivize them to conserve as well. I mean, on the order of hundreds of thousands of acre feet. So that's good news there. We need that. Agriculture, we will be working and have been. The trust has done some work with agriculture, but the state put aside about $250 million for what's known as agricultural optimization. That is designed to help farmers be more efficient and irrigation companies be more efficient. Again, that water is not, the water that they save doesn't have to be dedicated to the lake or get to the lake. You know, what Hillary was talking about, the questions, how do we get the water to the lake, how do we make a difference? We need those farmers to do the same thing. We need, as they become more efficient, we need to work with them to ensure that the water that they're saving, that we're leasing that water, getting it to the lake, dedicating it, getting it to the lake, or that they're donating it and it's getting changed into the lake. Just depletion savings are not going to be enough. What we're also going to have to do is work with farmers on what's known as, you brought up buy and dry. Colorado has done some of this, others where it's fallowing, if everybody knows what fallowing property is. We're working with farmers and the Utah Department of Ag and Food to take a slightly different approach, allow people to still grow crops, maybe even if the diverted amount of their water is a lot more than the depleted portion. If they dedicate their diverted portion, all of it or part of it that year to the lake, let's get as much of that to the lake as possible, especially if you've got a number of irrigators who are doing this on the same system. It makes a huge impact, much bigger impact to the lake, but they could still grow a dryland crop or grow half their season on their fields. And so we're trying to come up with a new model, but we're engaging with ag as much or more than we are with everybody else. Like I said, it's going to take everybody. So I didn't mean to be ignoring that fact. And it's not pointing fingers. They just use 2/3 of the water because that's how we developed.
Tim, thank you.
Okay.
We're gonna wrap it up. Okay. Yep, can I get this back on? All right, well, thank you, Tim. I learned a lot. I hope you guys did too. I hope it was worth the traffic congestion to get up here. I think it was. And again, thanks, Tim.